So great. So welcome, everyone. It's a pleasure to chair this meeting today. My name is Gerome Breen. I won't be talking too much during this meeting. We're here to hear about making our PGC analyses more reproducible, kind of a focus on GitHub and other tools. If you want to ask a question, Mark will have a break in the middle of his talk to take questions on the first section. It would be great if you can post your talks to either the chat or the Q&A button. So at the bottom of your screen, you should see a Q&A button, and you can post questions there, and it would be great. Okay, or Tammy is now advising me to post questions. That you should post questions to the chat. Okay, do it either way. I'll spot them. Okay, so with that, I'll hand you over to Mark. So Mark on his LinkedIn describes himself as a distracted generalist in evolution and genetics and psychology. But Mark is actually one of the most superb analysts I think that we have in the PGC. So with that, I'll just hand you over to Mark.
All right. Thank you very much, Gerome. So I'll just be talking about how we can move forward in making our analyses reproducible and public, and just some of the tools that are available for that. There we go. Okay, so yeah, the presentation is in two parts. So the first part is going to be about version control, and the second part will be about how to record information in a notebook. So this is the PGC GitHub. So if you just follow that URL, I'll leave it up on the screen for a few minutes, and you can see a few of the repositories that we've made public. I think there's one up there right now, and the idea is that we want to encourage our analysts to make more of our analyses available online so that people can critique them and so that we can reproduce them going forward. So this is just sort of what it looks like when you've logged in. So the way that we organize this is we have a team set up within the organization for each of the work groups. So the ones we have currently are listed on the screen there. We have maintainers for each of these work groups. So they're listed here, and they're just responsible for adding new members to the PGC organization, and also sort of just answering questions and being sort of a group of people to make decisions about how we want to organize this. So if you are a member of the PGC and you see your work group team listed there, then please get in touch with one of those named individuals. They'll get you added to the GitHub organization. If your work group is not listed and you're interested in version control and reproducible analysis, then give me an email and also CC your work group chair, and you can be set up as a maintainer. So what is version control? The first thing about version control is to realize that you're your first collaborators yourself. So you're always collaborating with past and future versions of yourself. So you want to leave yourself nice notes about why you did an analysis a certain way. If you need to go back and change, say, some QC parameter that you want to be different, you don't want to just start from scratch. You want to have a nice point that you can go back to and then follow step by step through that. So some of the problems that version control solves, you might have a directory on your computer that looks something like this. You've got a main analysis document. Maybe you've modified it a few times and added some new data or a new model into it. And then one of your collaborators has sent you a bug fix. Now you need to remember, well, which version did I send them? So which version of the analysis does this bug fix apply? So that's basically what version control solves. It lets you maintain a history of all the changes that you've made to your repository of code, and it lets you exchange these changes with collaborators. So there are sort of two interlinked technologies here that we're relying on. One is called Git, and this is the open source version control system that has both command line and GUI interfaces. There's also GitHub, which is a commercial website that hosts repositories of code that let you share them with the public for viewing, and also acts as a place that you can send code to and receive it from your collaborators. So Git was invented by Linus Torvalds, who is also the author of Linux. Git is what's called a distributed version control system. And what that means is, rather than everyone working from a single copy, every single copy of the repository basically is a backup of the entire history of the project. So you're not just working with the most recent version, you have on your computer access to the entire history of the project. One thing that makes Git a little bit different from other version control systems is it's very easy to create what's called a branch. And this is a way to sort of take your code in a different direction, try something new without messing up or overwriting the good copy that you have. So you can sort of try out different things. Git's pretty fast. There are a few disadvantages. I think some people find the name a little bit uncouth. Git is not great for working with large binary files. So if you have something like a Photoshop document, it's maybe not so great for that, but there is an extension to Git for working with that kind of data. It's also a little bit more granular than other version control alternatives. So there's sort of two use cases to think about how to use GitHub. The first is where we sort of see on the left here, is where you're just collaborating with yourself. So you might have some code on a laptop and you're also doing analysis on a high performance cluster like the Lisa cluster. And GitHub can be just a way to easily move code back and forth between those two systems. So you never have to worry about, did I remember to copy the most recent version of my analysis from one system to another? It's very simple with Git just to check that you're always up to date. Likewise, you can also use GitHub as a way to exchange code with a collaborator. And this can be useful, especially for people across institutions, because it's sometimes hard to have a common place to write code. So installing Git, if you're using GitHub, you can just go to their website and there's a desktop client that will interface directly with GitHub. If you are a OS X or Linux user, you probably already have these tools. They've been pretty standard for the last few years. So just go to your command line, try typing Git. It'll probably come up with some basic help. If you don't have it, you can just go to the main website to install it. And there are other ways to access it as well. So for example, if you're an RStudio user, there's a menu option for version control, and it will let you add a GitHub repository to a project. So you can just do it directly from within RStudio. The Git website also lists a lot of other GUI clients, so you can try looking for that as well. So Git kind of has a reputation for being extremely complicated. Just when you sort of dig down into what it does, it has this extremely complex data structure compared to other options. So this is just a sort of old math joke adapted to Git. But to sort of explain it, the main things you have to know is, so a repository in Git is just a collection of code and all of the history of changes of that code. Each change is a series of content changes to files, and this is called a commit. So committing something to a repository is taking all the changes you want and adding it in. Each of the commits is identified with a hexadecimal hash. That's a cryptographic hash of both the contents of that change as well as the previous version that it was based off. So if you sort of are looking around on GitHub or in any of the tools, you sometimes see these, it's usually 6 or 8 characters of I think it's probably a 64 character hash, and that's just a unique reference to those changes. And this diagram just shows that the way that this is normally thought of is one commit has a directional arrow to the one it was based off. So this first commit here, this file was added. In the second commit, some lines were added and deleted from the file. And then in the third commit, a line was added to file 1, and a new file, file 2, was also added. Sort of more visually what that looks like. So we have a remote repository of Git up in the cloud, and it's got two commits to it, and then we're working on our local laptop. So the first thing we run is a git clone command. This just says, take the copy on the remote server and put it onto my laptop. What you'll get on your local laptop is a working copy. So the first thing you'll notice in the working copy is the most up-to-date version of each of the files. And then inside this directory, there's a hidden directory called .git. And that folder holds the data structure that Git uses to manage the repository information. So inside that, you can't really look at it because it's a whole bunch of binary files, but conceptually what it has is copies of all the previous commits. So we've downloaded this repository. If we examine the history of it, we might see that it has 2 commits, a data munging commit that created a thing, and then say a second commit to this analysis file where a model is created. Now we want to start doing some work. So we open up this analysis.r in our editor. We add 1 line displayed in green here. We maybe subtract another line that's displayed in red. And then our first command is to add. So we take those changes and we say, okay, we're telling Git, we want to take these changes and bundle them into a commit. Git takes those changes and adds them to what's called the stage or the index. So now it's sort of taken these things together and said, okay, now you've told me that you want to make these into a commit. You can do some more work, add more files, keep on changing things. Although importantly to know, if you have done this step and you edit the analysis.r file again, that won't edit what you told Git you want to commit. So it'll still just keep those, that green and that red change. Once you're happy and you say, okay, I'm ready to submit this into the history of the repository, you run a command called commit, and you give it a message, a user readable description of what you've done. So for example, maybe you fixed a bug. Now all those changes have moved from the stage and they've been tacked on to the history of this project. So next, maybe we add a helper file and we delete some code from our primary analysis document. We add those 2 changes, stage them to be committed, and then run the commit commands. So for example, maybe we've moved some helper functions into an external file. And then finally, maybe we find out, oh, we don't need these helper functions because there's an R package that'll do it for us, so we can get rid of that file. And then our next commit will saying what we've done. So we've done all this work, but the important thing, even though we've edited this file, we've added a file and then deleted it, we can still go back to any of these previous versions and examine our work. So we've done a lot locally. We've added 3 commits to the repository, but these 3 commits currently only live on our local laptop, and we're free to edit these as much as we want until we're really satisfied with the changes that we've made. And the last command we could run is a push command. So that will copy these 3 sets of changes back up to the remote repository, for example, on GitHub. And then our collaborators could do another command to pull those changes down to their local copy. So the other really important concept is just branching and merging. So this is something that's kind of fundamental, although when you're just getting started, it's not something really to pay that much attention to. So for example, the default branch is just called master. So say we add one file to that branch. We have an idea, oh, maybe we want to try something else that we'll sort of leave for later. So we've made a new branch called new idea. Now, the important thing to remember about the branch command is it doesn't change anything in the working copy, and we're still working on master. So if we add a new file and then commit it, or if we change some lines in the file one and commit it, we're still in the master branch. To start working on our new idea, we need to run a different command called checkout. So now we've switched to the checkout branch. And any changes that we make to in this branch will be independent of the master branch. So now we have two competing sets of changes. Maybe we're happy with both of them. We want to reconcile them somehow. So we use checkout again, switch back to master, and then we can merge the new idea branch, and now we have a unified version. So that's just a really simple example of how you can create a branch to try something a little bit different. So I've listed out here the commands that I use most often. I won't go through all of them, but there's a free book on the Git website that has more tutorials and instructions about what these commands mean. And if you're using the GitHub desktop app, it has all these functions. They're just sort of maybe described slightly differently, but you have all the same power and utility there. So one important advanced topic are merge conflicts. So when you're working, Git's usually pretty good at, if you've made two changes to a single file, merging them together seamlessly. Where you run into problem is if you separately, so you make one edit on your laptop and one edit on your cluster, and you end up changing the same lines, or you're working with a collaborator and you're both trying to fix a bug in a particular function, then Git will know that it doesn't automatically know how to resolve them, and it'll warn you of a merge conflict. It'll put some text in your file, in your file where it's sort of setting out what the two sets of changes are, and it'll sort of bracket them in all these greater than and less than signs. So it's your responsibility to go in, intelligently reconcile these two changes. Maybe you just want to end up discarding one of them, or you find some common ground between them. Once you do that, then you can add and commit that merge back into the repository. The second advanced topic is something called Git ignore. So there's a lot of cruft that kind of comes from doing analysis that you don't really want polluting your repository. So R ends up writing like history files. You might have logs or temporary caches that you don't really want to be part of your repository. And there's also sensitive data you might be working with, like genotype files. So if you make a file called .gitignore in the top level of your repository, and you just give it bash-like shell expansion examples, then Git will just ignore anything with those kind of file names. So you won't worry about accidentally committing sensitive data or other miscellaneous files to your repository. Now, more specifically, so if you're working on Lisa, where we do all of our analyses, this is just an example of a project that I've done on Lisa. My Git ignore file, I've added a data directory. So I'm just telling Git ignore everything in the data directory. And on the right, I've sort of got a list of what the contents of my repository locally on Lisa looks like, and there's a data directory. And inside that, all I've done is I've just made symlinks to all of the genotype data. So this lets me both save space. I'm not needlessly copying data into my directory. It's a little bit higher security because the repository doesn't contain any information about the location of these files on Lisa. It just knows the symlink names that I've given them. And it also prevents the data from being able to be committed and uploaded to GitHub. Okay, so that's Git. Now the other side of it is GitHub. So this is just sort of a tour of the PGC organization. When you're given access to the PGC organization on GitHub, you'll see a list of repositories that are hosted there. And we've made one called the PGC template, and this can just be a starting point for new projects. If you click in on the template and go to its wiki, there'll be some additional documentation there about using Git, GitHub, and the PGC organization. And now if you are making a new repository, so when you're on the PGC GitHub organization, there's a big green button for create new repository. You can select this template as the starting point. And then you can choose whether your repository is public or private. So we're assuming most people want a private repository by default. Once you've created the repository, it'll take you to the home page for that repository. If you click on the settings tab and go into the manage access screen, this is where you can invite people to collaborate on the project. So when you click on that button that says invite teams or people, it'll come up with a field where you can start typing. So here I want to add, for example, the MDD team. So I start typing MDD. Any team name or GitHub user who's a member of the PGC organization will be listed first, but it'll sort of autocomplete suggested names of every other user on GitHub. So just be careful not to click on the wrong place. But this list of other non-PGC users can be useful if you want to invite an external collaborator. So once we've selected the MDD group, then we can choose what kind of access. So for example, I want to say everyone who's a member of the MDD team can have read access to this repository, which lets them view the code and download it to their own computer. Also, once you've set up the repository, there's this clone or download button, and that URL listed there is what you want to paste into either your command line tools or other tools, such as RStudio, to download that your code repository onto your local computer. Okay, so another sort of advanced topic, a little interlude, is SSH keys. So your computer will communicate with the GitHub website through the SSH protocol, so everything's encrypted. But you need to tell your GitHub account which computers of yours will be accessing your code repositories. So there's some instructions on the GitHub help about how to generate and encode and upload these keys. Next, if you are also, already using Git to version control your project, then you can make an empty repository. When you're creating one, you just don't initialize it with any kind of README, and Git will give you some instructions or code to use to how to push your existing local copy up to GitHub to share it. So GitHub also has some project management features. There's like a discussion board. You can sort of make project boards to sort of assign tasks to people and lots more. So I'd recommend just getting in there and having a poke around to learn about it. So now back to the PGC GitHub organization team. So I said we are currently organizing it with a team for each work group. And then let's see, each of these work groups is underneath a PGC team. So you can use either a work group or the PGC team to give selective access to each of the teams that you want. So when you are, oops, let me go back a slide. Okay, so when you're managing the workgroup repositories, by default, private repositories are only viewable by the owner. You need to invite people to collaborate. So those can either be, for example, giving your workgroup team read permission, and that associates your repository with that team, and then all team members can view it. If you're collaborating with other people, you can give them write access to your repository, and these include people who are outside the PGC organization. So that when you do that, those external collaborators will only be able to see the repository that you've given them access to, and won't be able to view any other PGC repositories. Finally, once you are happy with your results and you've written up your publication, then you can set your repository visibility to public, and that'll let anyone on the internet discover, use, and download your code. So I just have sort of an example. I'll see if I can switch to it. So just showing you, this is an analysis I've run for the MDD work group, where we wanted to do a meta-analysis that removed overlap with UK Biobank. So this is just sort of publicly viewable. Viewing the page, sort of what you see is first a list of all the files in the repository. So I can just sort of click on one, it'll give me the code for that part of the analysis. And if you create a file called readme or readme.md, then Git will display whatever the contents of that are on your page. So that can just be, a really good place to put, what is this project, who's involved, where do you find out more, how do you get started with reproducing this analysis. Okay, one final important topic for working with GitHub is, once you've made a repository public, every change, every commit that you put into that public repository is also public, even if you sort of tried to make a copy of it on your own GitHub account. So I won't go through these line by line. They'll be available on the slides to download, but they're just some instructions about how to make a new private copy of a public repository, make private changes to that, and then move them back to the public repository when you're ready to share them more widely. Finally, Git is a commercial service, so you get a few, free benefits from a free tier, but if you are a student or a staff member of the university, you can get upgrade to a pro account for free. Just follow that link. Okay, that's the first half of the talk, and I'll just take a short break there and take any immediate questions on Git or GitHub.
So I think we had a question from Leah Davis. Leah, can you speak?
Yeah, I don't think. I think you should read it out.
Yeah, I'll read it. Okay, so well then, Mark, you're a hero for pulling this together for PGC! Exclamation mark! Exclamation mark! So 2 questions. Can we coordinate with the data receiving committee, so stage 1 and 2 analysts for each work group start using the PGC GitHub? And 2, so let's take that question first.
Yeah, anyone who's a member of the PGC is welcome to join and start using it. So you can use it both if you have secondary analysis proposals, or if you are working on any of the primary analysis.
Okay, and I think Leah is unmuted now, so maybe she can ask the second part of her question.
Oh, hey, great. Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so we use Bitbucket, and we've been running GWAS analysis in the biobank for several of the PGC work groups, and so it seems like it would be, a great opportunity for us to also use the PGC GitHub and upload what we're doing in the biobank, which is usually a little bit different than how other like case control analyses are run. So given that we're using Bitbucket, what is the kind of simplest way for us to connect with the PGC GitHub? Do they talk very well together? I know that they both use Git, so it seems like they should be able to.
So the way to do it is, so you would you go into GitHub. So if you want to say you've got data on a repository on Bitbucket and you just want to have it mirrored on GitHub, the first thing you could do is go into your local copy and add a new remote repository. So it'd be git remote add, and you could call it GitHub and then give it the URL of the empty GitHub repository. And then you just can use the push command to push a copy up to GitHub. And then that version would just look like the current one on Bitbucket. Okay, so it's pretty easy to switch back and forth between different repositories. So for example, the University of Edinburgh has a local internal GitLab install, and I have both of those running concurrently, and I can push changes. So for example, you might want to use Bitbucket as this is our private copy, and we'll push it to GitHub when we're ready to make it public. You can certainly use it that way.
Yeah. All right, awesome, thanks.
Thank you, Leah.
Okay, I think we have a question from David Curtis. It's a problem if the central and local copies get updated separately, because then they won't merge. It seems one always has to do a pull every time one works on the files. What happens if two people happen to be working at the same time?
So if two people are working on the same file, the automatic merge will usually take care of that unless they're actually editing the same lines. So it is a problem, but it's also kind of encouraged. You want everyone to be kind of pulling in their own direction, and then when you're merging, you're kind of reconciling those two, those two changes. So most changes you'll find will merge. Like if someone's editing the top and someone's editing the bottom, then those will merge fine.
Okay.
Of course, it won't catch you if there's some actual logical inconsistency between those. So every time you pull down, you want to test that the changes that have been added, are compatible with the changes that you've made.
Yeah, and doing sensible things like working in branches and stuff would be.
Yeah, that's another way. Is just make a private branch if you want to try something else, and then you can make lots of changes and reconcile them down the line.
Okay, that's great. All right, thanks very much for everyone who asked questions. And Mark, if we could proceed with the rest of your talk then.
Yeah. Okay, so the second part is about making an analysis notebook. So this idea comes from this concept called literate programming. So this is something that Donald Knuth, who's the inventor of the TeX typesetting system, sort of came up with. And normally when we code, you have some code doing the bulk of the work, and then you maybe write a few comments kind of explaining what you did. The idea of literate programming is to sort of turn that on its head, that you want the main thrust of your effort to be explaining what your program should do to a human, and then let the code kind of support that effort. So a notebook is just a way to mix description, prose, code, and output, including figures, into a single document. So normally you've got some code, a code file, and some data, and then you undergo this render step that will output something like a web page or a PDF with all of your data. And this is just an example of a power calculation notebook from Naomi Ray. So, excuse me, the things you want to use an analysis notebook for: primarily recording analytic decisions. It can be a list of code and commands that'll help you when you're revising or rerunning an old analysis. It makes it easier to collaborate because people can look at your code and can look at your description of what you were trying to do and make sure that those match up. A analytic notebook is also just a great place to look for details when you're writing up an analysis. So, you know, what was that parameter we used on the QC stage? You got it written down somewhere. And it also serves as the basis of the next analysis. So if we've just finished up MDD2, we'd like a good starting point for doing the MDD3 GWAS. So as far as the way to use these, you can sort of come in a hierarchy. So the most fundamental purpose of a notebook is just this description of all the decisions that you've made. Once you've established that, it's a place to list all the code, commands, and parameters that are necessary for your analysis. Ideally, on top of that, it's actually a tool that lets you sort of click go, and all of the codes and commands will sort of run live to reproduce, and output all of your results. And then at the top pinnacle is the idea of a reproducible environment. So this is where you've taken, all of the, not just the code and description, but actually the software programs and the particular version numbers required to reproduce your analysis. So hopefully people are already, in a lab book somewhere, taking a note of decisions and why they use certain parameters. Using a notebook is just a place to list commands and code, I think is what we're trying to aim for using the PGC GitHub right now. The ability for the notebook to be run and sort of compile, in real time, all of your results isn't completely practical for the PGC because we have a lot of data sets that cannot be publicly shared. And we also have lots of commands. So if you're doing a GWAS with Workgroup, that takes a while. You don't want it to run every single time that you're generating. If you fixed a few typos in the introduction of your notebook, you don't want to rerun those commands every time. And then these reproducible environments, it's a future goal, but not something that we're focused on at this moment. So as far as implementing a notebook, there are two popular programs right now. One's called Rmarkdown, the other is called Jupyter. As their names suggest, R is sort of leaning toward using the R language, while Jupyter is originally a Python-based program, but both of them are equally capable of using almost any programming language in them, and also saving out to a web page or a PDF or a Word document. Here I'm focusing on Rmarkdown because it's just a tool that I use. And I like it because it's a little bit easier to version control. There's some complexities of the Jupyter format that makes it a little bit tougher to merge alternate versions together. So what is Rmarkdown? It's based on a formatting syntax called Markdown that was originally made for blogging. And it just makes it so that you sort of can type some plain text and things like if you put asterisks around something, it'll become bold. Rmarkdown is a layering on top of this where the code blocks that are set aside for formatting can also be run and interpreted. So for R code, 3 backticks, some curly braces with the letter R, and then 3 more backticks at the bottom. Anything inside there will be interpreted as R code. And then when you render the document, so there's an R package called Rmarkdown. It has a render function that will turn this analysis.rmd markdown file into a rendered HTML document that has your commentary, the code blocks, and the output all in a single document. And one thing that's nice about the HTML it produces is the figures are embedded within the HTML file, so you can just email that analysis.html or post it to a website or something, and don't have to worry about any supplementary files. It's completely self-contained. Rmarkdown also has something called a notebook that the text file part of it is just the same. It's just when you're working with it in RStudio, it behaves more like an interactive notebook, a bit more like Jupyter, or if you're used to something like Mathematica. So if you want to just have a play, just open up RStudio and make a new notebook, and it sort of gives you a little template that explains the formatting and how it works. You can also put shell commands. So if instead of R, you put bash is the code, then that can just run. And when you compile this, if the Plink 2 is installed on your computer, it'll open up sort of a terminal session behind the scenes and run whatever command you've given it. And then anything printed as output by the command will end up in your document. So I said before that there are some commands that you might want to keep a record of what the command was, but you don't necessarily want that command to be run every time the notebook is compiled into a document. So if you use this eval equals false argument to the code block, then it'll just skip over that. So for example, here we have a Recopoly post imputation command to run a meta GWAS. Now on Lisa, Lisa's missing one of the programs required for compiling markdown documents called pandoc. So these are just some installation commands of how you can get that if you want to compile a notebook on Lisa. And if you sort of go back a few slides, you'll notice I had like in my git ignore pandoc. So if I've downloaded this into my repository, Git won't try to add pandoc into the repository. So the last feature that's really fun about GitHub is you can turn any of these notebooks into a website. So if you go into the settings of the repository, there's something called GitHub Pages. Create a file called index.md, and then you can just write Markdown inside that document, and that will get published live to a website. So I'll just switch back to Safari and show you what that looks like. So I have that set up for this GWAS repository, and if I just click on the link I've made, I'm seeing this, maybe I'll just go back and show off the index.rb.md file. So that's just what it looks like. If I click on raw, so that's sort of what the raw file of this looks like. But GitHub is kindly interpreting that into a nice web page, and then that just becomes the home page of the document. So I just sort of have, project description. Here's where to find the code and how to find the data. And I also have a link for the actual notebook. So this is the HTML output from my R Markdown notebook. So I've got a description of what the project is, information about how to link in the data files on Lisa, some sort of setup. So now here's some R code running to pull in information that I need to do an analysis. A section making the phenotypes that I want that are different. A Recopoly command to run the GWAS, some output checks. So there's like a figure embedded that are generated. Finally, the analysis, and then there's some commands down here that copy in the important results. And I could do things like pull the Manhattan plot that Recopoly generated and make that visible within the notebook. So thank you for listening. I guess we'll go to any final questions. And again, if you're interested, if you're a member of the PGC and you're interested in taking part, please get in touch.
Okay, thank you very much, Mark. That was excellent. So if people have any further questions, could they please put them in the chat window and we'll ask them. But I guess maybe I have a broader question, Mark. So, so what you've described is an essential part to kind of making our science a bit more reproducible. And certainly when we need to repeat analyses, as we often need to do in the revision process for papers, having this type of repository and tracking code this way will be very useful. What about the other side of the reproducibility effort in science? What have you considered of whether we should be pre-registering studies and registering our analytical plans for our experiments and so on? What do you think of this?
Yeah, so that's part of it. So this reproducibility is really just sort of a coding statistical reproducibility. So assuming that your data is the same, you're confident that you can get out the same results, but it doesn't really touch on any of the other sort of more experimental or social aspects of reproducible science. There are a few things you could do. So for example, if you want to pre-register a study, you might do that. And then in your GitHub repository, you could say make a copy and commit a copy of what you've said you're going to do into the repository. Okay. So the way that the sort of the cryptographic functions in Git work is it's not really possible to go back and change something you've done in the past. So if you say we're going to do X, you can't make changes to your repository. You start analyzing data and then say, oh wait, let's pretend X never happened. So X is sort of a permanent record of what you did. So, so you could, for example, make that public. But if you went in and sort of tried to fiddle with the bits or something, then that breaks the link between that original file and all of the subsequent changes. So people would sort of know that you've gone in and changed that. So you could sort of use that as kind of a way to publicly declare what you've agreed you're going to do as your pre-registration.
Okay, thanks very much, Mark. So I don't see that we've got further questions coming through. But Mark, if there are analysts on this call who want to join this, they should just email you.
Yeah, or if let's see if I go back to if I can go back to the slide with the other maintainers. Yeah, so if you're already a member of one of the listed work groups, then just get in contact with your team maintainer. If you're a member of the PGC and your work group isn't here, then yeah, get in touch, and yeah, we can set up a team for you.
Okay. And then we do have one questions come in from Andrew McIntosh, and basically he wanted you to comment about people who currently might use Dropbox or Google Drive to, I guess, maintain their code and so on.
Oh yeah, so obviously, shared Dropbox is something you can use to work with collaborators. There are a few advantages of using Git. So when you have a local repository, it's completely private to you, so you don't have to worry about if two people are trying to edit the same file. It also keeps a more sort of an easier to examine list of all the changes you've made. So if you want to go back to a previous version, Dropbox, for example, has a feature where you can sort of, it'll record older versions of files that you can sort of restore, but it doesn't have any way to sort of visually examine, well, what's the difference between that old version and my new one. So Git has some tools that you can visually display the differences between newer and older versions. Git also has the branching feature, so if you want to try a different analysis without making new files and then discard it later, or make that the main version you want to work with going forward, it handles all of that a lot more elegantly.
Okay, that's great. All right, so I think everyone has asked questions, and I thank Mark for an excellent talk, which I'm sure will be used as a tutorial by many people. So the talk will be posted to the PGC website and our YouTube channel, so it can be found there. And I'd like to wish everyone a great weekend, and thanks very much for attending. Bye.